All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and I wanted to welcome everybody to tonight's educational webinar titled Disabled Artist's Journey Through Art and Activism. We would like to utilize the chat feature of Zoom for any questions or comments that you might have during the presentation. However, if you are unable to use this feature of Zoom, please save all questions and comments for the end of the webinar. If you are not a member of United Spinal Association, the Greater Philadelphia chapter, we invite you to join using the website listed on our opening slide, which we will post again after the webinar. Now for tonight's host, we'd like to welcome Wendy Elliott-Vandivier. So Wendy is a certified senior professional in human resources with a diverse background in government civil rights enforcement, managing human resources in private industry, and community advocacy. Wendy has been a leader in the disability civil rights community for over 30 years, and in her professional work, she has successfully managed human resources, employee relations, EEO, affirmative action, and diversity issues for several large businesses. Before joining the private sector, Wendy worked for 9 years for the Office for Civil Rights, the U.S. Department of Education, where she managed the agency's regional technical assistant staff. She played a role in the implementation of federal civil rights statuses in a 6-state region. Her strong commitment to enhancing opportunities for women, minorities, and people with disabilities extends beyond her professional experience. She is a former board member of the American Association of People with Disabilities and the former chair of the Philadelphia Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities. There, she advised the mayor and assistant deputy mayor with respect to existing and proposed policies, programs, and services for people with disabilities, and informed the public at large about the needs of the disability community. She was also the co-founder of the Mom Center, which is making options for motherhood at Thomas Jefferson University. Wendy has a BFA from Temple University, the Tyler School of Art, and her paintings explore issues of family, memory, and experiences as a disabled woman. Her autobiographical cartoons focus on attitudinal barriers and stereotypes regarding disabilities and some of the microaggressions that disabled people experience while living normal, un-inspirational lives. She is also a photographer of microscale monuments in nature and is often inspired by close-up images that people often do not notice in daily life. Things like tree bark, dead leaves, flower anatomy, and water. United Spinal Association Greater Philadelphia chapter is truly honored to present tonight's webinar presenter, Wendy Elliott-Vandivier.
Hey, thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today during our United Spinal webinar. And thank you to Megan Muller and her terrific education committee for offering these monthly webinars for our community. I'm so grateful for all of the work that you're doing. For a little image description of myself, I'm a middle-aged white woman with curly red hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a blue dress. I'm an artist, as you know, and an advocate in the disability community for many years, as well as a professional working in the civil rights and human resources areas. I served in leadership positions as president of Disabled in Action of Pennsylvania. I was chair of the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities for 7 years, and I was on the board of directors for the American Association of People with Disabilities. And I'm now co-president of United Spinal Greater Philadelphia area chapter. I'm also a wife, mother, friend, animal lover, and general pain in the butt. I'll begin by telling you about how I got started doing art and disability advocacy. And I'll then show you some examples of my disability cartoons. I've been making art my whole life. I would always make drawings, paintings, sculpture since I was a young child. It was something that I enjoyed doing, and it came easily for me. As a child, I took classes at the Philadelphia School Art League and Cheltenham Arts Center. And when it came time to go to college, I won the Philadelphia Board of Ed Scholarship in Art and the Philadelphia City Scholarship for my extracurricular activities. These scholarships enabled me to go to college for free. I graduated magna cum laude with honors from Tyler School of Art of Temple University, where I majored in sculpture and also dabbled in painting, photography, and other areas. And I've continued to make art over the last several decades. My paintings explore issues of family, memory, and experiences as a disabled woman, and my autobiographical cartoons focus on attitudinal barriers and stereotypes regarding disabilities and some of the microaggressions that disabled people experience when we're just out there trying to live our quote unquote normal, uninspirational lives. All of my work is based on true stories, real life experiences. I always say that I couldn't make this stuff up. I paint and draw my reality, and I use humor to help educate others and cultivate disability pride. We as a community need to work to break down the barriers that prevent people with disabilities from fully participating in the mainstream of our society. Historically, people with disabilities have been very isolated and insulated in our communities, going to separate, segregated schools. We rode on separate, unequal transportation systems and live in the most restrictive institutional settings. And many barriers, as you know, have begun to erode over the past several decades. It's not so unusual to see people with disabilities out there in our communities, working, shopping at malls, going to the movies, eating out at restaurants, although not in the current times of COVID-19. Today, thanks to the ADA, most new construction is barrier-free. You no longer have to practically dehydrate yourself when you go out for the day to the movies, shopping, and so forth. Most new facilities now have accessible restrooms, dressing rooms that you can get your wheelchair inside of. Movie theater management no longer tell me that I'm a fire hazard. They used to do that, 30 years ago, because I was hanging out in my chair in the aisle. All new movie theaters now have wheelchair accessible seating, even though sometimes they're in the back row. And there are curb cuts at most major intersections. And in some parts of our city, you can actually take the train or lift-equipped bus. I was a leader in Philadelphia in the late 1970s and early 80s to force SEPTA to put lifts on buses. We demonstrated throughout the city, blocking major intersections, and we even took over a SEPTA board meeting. I was never arrested for any of these activities, mainly because paddy wagons were not accessible back then. At the same time, we still have a lot of work to do to make the dream of the ADA become a reality. So many of our brothers and sisters are forced to live in nursing homes. We still remain second-class citizens when it comes to voting. Many polling places and voting machines are inaccessible, and we're expected to be satisfied with voting by absentee ballot and not with our fellow citizens. And we are yet to achieve economic empowerment. About 70% of us are currently unemployed, which is the highest rate of unemployment for any group in this nation. Yet most people outside of our community rarely talk about this issue. In the age of COVID-19, I hope that disabled folks do not get pushed to the back of the bus when it comes to employment and returning to work. Companies are discovering that many workers can perform their jobs successfully from home, an accommodation that disabled people have been denied for many years. I'm not saying that everyone who's disabled needs to work from home, but I believe that it should be an option as requested. Advocacy for me started at an early age. I've been disabled since birth. I have spina bifida. And unlike many of my peers at the time, I grew up in a very mainstreamed environment. I went to regular public schools in Philadelphia, where I found that I was always the only disabled kid in the school. I refused to go to Widener Memorial, which was a special segregated school for children with disabilities. I wanted to go to the same school as other kids on my block, and my parents supported me in this. In high school, I was a straight A student, got involved in all kinds of extracurricular activities. Short of joining the football team. If I could have done that, I probably would have done that too. I was class treasurer of a class of 1,100 students, art editor of the school magazine, and on and on. I was really sickening. But I found that I was often judged because of my disabilities rather than my abilities. For example, I would invariably get the, quote, most courageous student award, which were, in my opinion, the token disabled person award. I remember when I was about to graduate from high school, and I had a feeling that I would be getting this award. However, this time when they announced that the award would be for $100, I decided to take the money. So I'm a real woman of principle. Interestingly, I never knew any other people with disabilities when I was growing up. It wasn't until I was 18 years old and a freshman in college that I got involved in the disability rights community. I became president of Disabled in Action, and I've continued with my advocacy, both within and outside of the system, for almost 40 years. I've been a working professional in civil rights and human resources for several major corporations. And again, I've continued to have to fight and educate others about disability issues. It's not always easy. I feel like a pioneer, like when I was in school and I was the only person with a disability. But my experience is not typical. As I mentioned earlier, the unemployment rate for our nation's 61 million disabled Americans is about 70%. And among people with disabilities who do work, the average earnings are 35% less than the earnings for workers without disabilities. No minority group in America has such a dismal record of participation in the labor force as do people with disabilities. Yet most of us want to work, and we've been underutilized, underemployed, and underrepresented in the workplace. We all know how the competition for qualified workers has become extremely vigorous. With the number of workers falling dramatically, employers are faced with the challenge of finding qualified workers. And this represents a real window of opportunity for people with disabilities. But why, after 30 years after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, do we still see such chronic unemployment? Even though we have all these wonderful laws on the books, we can't legislate attitudes. And probably one of the most important issues, even today, is attitudinal barriers, or the stereotypes and misconceptions that society has about people with disabilities. There are many attitudinal barriers that need to be battered down through education. And I created my cartoons to help shine a light on the many types of attitudinal barriers that I personally experienced. My feeling is that the only way to break down some of these attitudinal barriers is for people with disabilities to continue to become more visible in the workplace, in our communities, and that we have more representation in media. And I believe that this is a process of education that is it's a two-way street. The responsibility for positive interaction between a non-disabled person and a disabled person is two-sided. Sometimes for me, it can get exhausting. I feel like I have to educate everybody that I see on the street, but we need to educate others who may be well-meaning but lack knowledge and awareness about disability. In my own personal life, I've never separated my art from my advocacy. It's all about repairing the world, making it a better, accessible, and more just world for all of us. And at this point, I want to show you some examples of my art. Okay, so I'm going to show you my cartoons. The first one is called Woof the Expletive Deleted. There's always a lot of cursing in my cartoons, so I hope there aren't any little kids in the audience. This cartoon shows some actual quotes of things that people have said to me while I was getting out of my van going to work. So on the left side of the cartoon, you see me in my wheelchair with wild red hair flying in the wind. And then there's my service dog in the middle, and I made the service dog with 3 heads that are describing different kinds of emotions. So some of the things that people have said are, "Hi, beautiful," but they're really talking about the dog. It's good to see you out today. like they let me out of the home for the day. You're going to get a speeding ticket. I can't tell you how many times people have said that to me, or you need to put a horn on that thing. A lot of people have said to me, and they think they're paying me a compliment. They say, I don't think of you as disabled. And the dog is growling back, I don't think of you as enlightened. Or they say, you're so inspirational. And the dog says, I'll make you inspirational. One of the worst things that anyone ever said was, it's people like you who put my life into perspective. You know, things could be worse. I could be you. Or they said, I'll pray for you. Jesus loves you. But the dog has his tongue out and he's responding, aren't we Jewish, Mom? Or people say, what happened to you, or good for you. Almost everything I do, somebody's saying good for you, and they put their thumb up. It's very annoying, but endless. I get inspiration for my cartoons by just getting out in public and doing normal things like going to work, getting out of my van, eating out at restaurants, going to the doctor's office, traveling to new places. Obviously, COVID-19 has put a real damper on my art inspirations for new cartoons. And sometimes I'm unable to think of a good response at the time to the insensitive remarks or conduct of others. So I started writing things down on a notepad app on my cell phone. And eventually, after a few days or a couple of weeks, I get an idea for a cartoon. And I start to make rough sketches of the ideas at first, and then I refine them with detailed pen and ink drawings and apply color with color pencils. I also use animals in my cartoons a lot, especially my service dog as a kind of alter ego or comic insult dog to communicate things that are sometimes difficult to say in public. The color in my cartoons is very happy, bright, and sweet, although the subject matter is definitely not. I use humor and color to draw people in, to get them interested. And I use a light touch to educate people about my experiences living with a disability and having to deal with the microaggressions and comments from others. Here's another cartoon. It's called Can I Pet Your Dog? This cartoon shows a woman on the left side. She's wearing a lavender shirt and jeans, and she's tapping the shoulder of a man next to her who's wearing a green shirt and brown pants. And the man is on the cell phone looking away. He doesn't seem to be part of this conversation. We don't even know who he is. But this woman says to him, can I pet your dog? And I'm looking at her and my mouth just dropped. And I just said, huh? But the dog offers his own snarky comments. He says, woof the, why don't you ask her? So sometimes we tend to avoid people with disabilities or consider their companions to be conversational go-betweens. For example, when the person only talks to the non-disabled person accompanying the individual with a disability. I've had this experience traveling on an airplane when a flight attendant once asked my manager who was traveling with me, can she transfer into a regular seat? Or is this her wheelchair? And I would sometimes sarcastically answer in the third person, like, yes, this is her wheelchair. And I've had this experience with medical professionals too. Sometimes they may unconsciously do this, but they all often make more eye contact with my husband when they're asking questions of me, or they go back and forth and look at my husband and me. I've also had this experience when they'll frequently ask my husband, can I pet your dog? When I'm sitting right there. And I feel invisible in these situations. And this cartoon tells that story. But luckily, this kind of thing doesn't happen to me very often, especially now that I have my service dog, my new service dog, Lucy. I find that many people will now talk to me, strangers that I don't even want to talk to. And the dog is kind of a social lubricant. Whereas in the past, people would look away or stare out of the corner of their eye. I've suddenly become the center of attraction with my dog. But this sometimes has its downsides. Some people will run up and start petting the dog without asking for my permission. They might yell out, hi, Lucy. And Lucy's badge has a harness that says, don't pet me, I'm working. And sometimes I feel like adding another badge that says, say hi to Wendy. With service dogs like guide dogs, it's best not to yell out at them when they're working or ask to pet them. It can be very distracting for the animal, and depending on the situation, like if they're crossing the street, it could be extremely dangerous. One of the funniest experiences that I had with my first service dog was when I was traveling on the Pennsylvania Turnpike with another manager going to an unemployment hearing. That was something that I did a lot as an HR manager, and it was in many years ago when they still had people in the toll booths. And I was driving my little red Honda Civic when I stopped at the toll booth to pay, and the attendant asked me, "Is that your seeing eye dog?" And I quickly responded, "Yeah, he told me to get off at this exit." So that's one of the more wild things that happened with me and my first service dog. And here's another, oops, how do I go back? Sorry about that. So here's another cartoon. It's called What Happened to You? In this cartoon, there's a tall, dark, handsome man on the left side, and I'm in my younger days on the right side in a manual wheelchair. And the man is asking me, "What happened to you?" And I respond, "I used to dance with the Bolshoi Ballet. During a performance one night, I slipped and fell off the stage. I landed in the orchestra pit, and the conductor's wand severed my spine." But what I'm really thinking in the thought bubble is nothing. What happened to you? So strangers with disabilities often feel entitled to ask disabled people very personal questions. When I was younger, this happened to me a lot. And sometimes to protect myself, I would make up outlandish stories like the Bolshoi Ballet story. And many times they bought it. This cartoon highlights a contradiction of life with a disability. You're often invisible in conversations, yet you're under the microscope when someone doesn't respect your privacy and feels entitled to examine your life. Oops. Sorry, I'm going too quickly. The next cartoon talks about terminology and some of the words that society uses to describe people with disabilities. There's a lot of euphemistic, sugar-coated words that have come into fashion and hopefully will go out of fashion to date. In this cartoon, you see five little Wendy's. And the first one shows physically challenged. Here I'm like Atlas. I'm holding the world on my shoulders. And the next one shows differently abled. And here I have 3 arms, an extra eye on my forehead. I have a unicorn horn coming out of my head. I certainly have some very extra special different abilities. The other one says wheelchair bound, and I'm literally bound and gagged in my wheelchair. And the one next to that shows someone confined to a wheelchair. I have chains around my shoulders, my waist, and my legs, and there's a little padlock locking me up in my wheelchair. But the reality is on the right side, I'm free in my wheelchair. The wheelchair is a source of freedom and mobility. It's not something that's necessarily confining. So for me, the best terminology is disabled person with a capital D, because disability is part of my identity. It's not the whole ball of wax. There's a lot more to me than being disabled, but I'm proud of who I am as a disabled woman, and it's part of my identity. But we have to remember that terminology is a constantly evolving thing, and we need to respect what terminology people in the community prefer. Hey, the next cartoon is called Handy Capable, one of the words that I absolutely hate. In this cartoon, I'm showing a defiant looking woman in a wheelchair who is very capable in using her hands to use a censored word. Continuing the themes of euphemistic terms to describe people with disabilities, this piece explores a new and particularly hurtful term, which combines the denial of disabled identity with an old term, handicapped, which literally meant cap in hand, like someone who would be out on the street begging for money. And this implies that the only vocational fit for a disabled person is to beg. In this cartoon, however, the disabled woman is proud and defiant. and staking a claim as to what terminology they deserve and what terminology should be censored. This cartoon illustrates the employment discrimination faced by people with disabilities who you know have the highest rate of unemployment in any group in our country. Real accomplishments and qualifications, like other aspects of our humanity, are often overshadowed by assumptions and prejudice about disability. So in this cartoon, I'm pulling up for an interview. I'm wearing a sort of an olive color suit. I look very professional in my suit. I'm giving my resume to the HR manager, who's a conservative looking man wearing a blue suit with a red tie. He's got gray hair. And behind me is my service dog, who also has a lot of qualifications and a resume that she's trying to hand over to the HR manager. So the cartoon reads, I am a human resources professional with over 25 years of experience in multiple industries. I have my SPHR and SHRM SCP certifications. My diverse background combines work in the federal government, private industry, and community advocacy. And the dog has her own thing to say. She's got the resume in her mouth, and she's saying, I am a certified service dog with over 8 years of experience as a VP of dog operations management with a concentration in employee relations. Woof, woof. But what is the HR manager saying? Here, I'm making fun of HR managers. I'm an HR manager. But the HR manager is thinking she's in a wheelchair. She has a dog. Here's another cartoon. This one is a humorous interpretation of what happens quite oftenly when people in wheelchairs, especially those that need van accessible spaces, and when they try to find a place, a lot of times people are running out of their car, or they say, you know, I'll only be a minute. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to park in certain places, and people are running in front of me. They're going into the state store to purchase liquor, and they say, I'll be right back. So in this cartoon, I'm not saying that people that have physical, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that people who have invisible disabilities don't have the right to use the spaces, but I do believe that there's a lot of abuse for people that are using the spaces just for their own convenience. So in this cartoon, you see a maroon car in the background. The license plate says entitled, and there's a woman in a running suit with a red tank top and red shoes. Her hair is flying in the wind, and she says, got a great parking space. But the tagline reads, Grandma's been dead for years, but her parking privileges live on. And you see there's a little grandma that's like a skeleton with a bonnet on her head. So just my sarcastic humor, so forgive me here. Here's another true story that happened to me when I was hiking with my service dog. This is Lucy. We were going in a beautiful park in upstate New York in Ithaca, and this woman comes up to me. She's on the left side. She's wearing a pink shirt. She's wearing jeans. She has blonde hair, and I'm sitting in the middle in my motorized wheelchair wearing a blue dress. And my service dog is sitting in front of us wearing her little red harness. So the woman comes up to me and says, I can tell you don't need any help. Otherwise, I'd ask. But the dog has a quick response. I can tell you need a muzzle. So this thing really happens to me. So some people might see people with disabilities as needing more help than they actually do. Some of us have varying disabilities and abilities. Some of us can use our hands and arms. Some can get out of their wheelchairs or even walk a few short distance. But a lot of times people regard us as having more physical and even mental disabilities than actually exist. So they might be overly helpful trying to push us in our wheelchairs across the street, or trying to help us at times when we really clearly don't need any help. Here's another cartoon. It's called How Did You Get Here? This is when I went to a a local hospital. And I caution you, if you have a disability and you're in a wheelchair, probably not a good idea to go to a local hospital. I prefer to go to some of the larger teaching hospitals in Center City. I usually find I get better treatment as a disabled person. So here I'm going to this local hospital to get an ultrasound. And the ultrasound tech on the left side says to me, "How did you get here?" And I said, "I drove my van." And she responds, "Oh, that's amazing. You're so inspirational." But my service dog, Lucy, who was a puppy at the time, I hadn't even met her yet, but I added her into the cartoon. And she's wearing her little space helmet. And Lucy says, "They beamed us up on an intergalactic spaceship." So that's how we got here. It was very amazing. Here's another true story. When I went out to one of our favorite Italian restaurants, my husband and I went out to dinner. My son and daughter-in-law were also present, but I didn't put them in the cartoon. And the service dog is under the table. So the waiter comes up to the table and asks me, "Do you ever pray for something better? You know, to not need a wheelchair?" And this time I came up with a quick response. I don't usually, but I said to him, looked him right in the eye and I said, "I have everything I need." And it was true. I had my husband and family and my dog around me, and I have everything I need. But the dog comes in with her own humor and light touch. And she says, "I need some chicken marsala with a side of penny." Here's another cartoon with Lucy, the service dog. It's about the service dog is commenting on the different types of animals that often get pawned off as service animals. And again, I'm not saying that there's people that have invisible disabilities that may have service animals, but there's a lot of unusual animals that you sometimes see on airplanes. In recent years, service dogs have become more well-known and visible. People with disabilities have often co-opted laws that are designed to protect the needs of disabled people to serve their own needs. Some, for instance, have tried to board airplanes with a peacock or a micro pig, or take their small dogs into stores, restaurants, and on planes. And in many ways, this is a theft from a group who's already marginalized, as it erodes respect for the service animal and leads to resentment of laws that are designed to protect the rights of people with disabilities. So in this cartoon, you see my service dog saying "woof the," and she's looking at a comfort cock, a therapy terrapin, a service snake, and above her is a little spider who's hanging from the elephant's tusk, and it says "service spider," in parentheses, "do not pet." And then taking up half the page is the emotional support elephant. Okay, and this is one of my recent cartoons. It talks about some of the myths and stereotypes about disability. And the cartoon is kind of a takeoff on the cartoon that I did on terminology. And I changed it up a bit and rendered it a little bit more detailed, highlighting some of the stereotypes that are out there about disabled people. So the first one on the left side shows the person wearing a Superman suit. I've got a red cape, the blue suit with a big S on the chest, and I'm flexing my muscles, very powerful. And the title there is Super Crip. The next one over says, has me in my wheelchair wearing very sweet pastel-y kind of colors, pastel pink and blue. I've got angel wings and a halo over my head, and it reads "inspirational." The next one, I'm dressed completely in rolls. I've got a hat made out of rolls. I'm wearing a shirt and pants that are made out of hollow rolls. I even have shoes that are made out of rolls. And I drew myself this way because a lot of times people tell me I'm a role model, but I don't really consider myself as a role model for anyone. And then the next one says pitiful and has a gray cloud with tears falling down out of the cloud, raining down on my head. My hair is soaking wet. I've got a tear in my eye. My clothes are getting drenched from all the tears. So that's definitely pitiful. But the reality, I'm just me. I'm wearing my purple disability pride t-shirt, and I'm just being myself. I'm not any of those stereotypes. Oops, sorry. This is another cartoon. This is an actual quote of a time when one of my great aunts decided to give me a compliment, a quote unquote compliment. And she comes up to me. Here's an older woman with gray hair on the left side. And she's looking at me and says, "Boy, Wendy, if you had two good legs, you'd really knock them dead." And I'm looking away, just looking like aghast at her. In the thought bubble, you see me looking like Wonder Woman, like with my legs flying up in the air. My crutches have flames coming out of them. But what I'm saying to her is, I knock them dead just the way I am. And I think that's true for all of us with disabilities. We knock them dead just the way we are. We don't need to change. We don't need to be cured. We're beautiful, powerful people just the way we are. Here's another thing that really happened to me. As a lot of you know, I'm a mother. My son is grown now, but this is something that happened to me a few weeks after giving birth to a baby boy. Wendy went to a party, and I'm holding my son on my shoulder. I've got a diaper on my shoulder. I had just finished burping him. And this lady who I didn't know comes in. I think she was a friend of my parents that didn't know me. And she said, "And whose child is this?" Like she couldn't fathom that I could have been the mother. And I just kind of glared back and said, "Mine." But my baby is saying, "Mama, mama." So continuing the themes of invisibility and the widespread assumptions that people with disabilities are helpless and dependent and incapable of being someone else's caregivers. Even my own parents didn't think I should get pregnant or have a baby. Um, they thought that I couldn't do it. It would be too dangerous. And when I had my son, it was not recognized. Even after months of bed rest and complications in the hospital, people still didn't realize that I was his mother. To this day, people with disabilities are often viewed as asexual and discouraged from playing roles in society, such as partner, parent, or lover. Throughout history, if you think about it, we were often warehoused in institutions or even sterilized. So I hope that my artwork can help liberate people to believe that they can be anything that they want to be, including caring for another human being as they develop. And my son, I think he said it best when he was at age 4, with great clarity. Wendy's son made a pronouncement, and he said, "You're just not standable, Mom." And I just loved it, like I was some kind of twistable, bendable, Gumby, not standable mom. There was a lot of clarity to it, and it showed that he didn't view my disability in a negative way. I just wasn't a standable mom. I did everything for him. So it was just an amazing thing. I never forgot that statement. And the last cartoon shows that my message is really not that hard. It's just treat disabled people with dignity, respect, kindness, just like you would treat anybody else. This cartoon shows my view of what a more perfect world would look like. So in the center, you see me in my a manual wheelchair. And people are saying nice things to me, like, "I see you, I appreciate you, I value you, I welcome you, I hear you, I include you, I respect you." And I'm saying, "I thank you." So thank you so much for the opportunity to share my art and story with you today. I hope that you enjoyed seeing my cartoons, and I hope that you'll feel empowered to tell your own stories through art, whether it's visual arts, music, performance, poetry, and so forth. We as a community have a lot to be proud of, and our voices need to be heard. So thank you very much.